The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Martinez adjusted her shooting stance. Her weathered hands gripped the .50 caliber rifle with practiced ease, the weight of the massive weapon feeling natural after 15 years of military service. She had been up since dawn, preparing for what she hoped would be a routine training session with the new recruits. Sarah was known throughout the base as one of the finest marksmen in the entire division. At 34, she had earned her reputation through countless hours of practice and an almost supernatural ability to hit targets at impossible distances. Her fellow soldiers respected her not just for her shooting skills, but for her unwavering dedication to proper training and safety protocols. The training range stretched out before her, a series of targets positioned at various distances from 500 to 1,200 meters. Each target bore the distinctive black and white pattern that had become so familiar to her over the years. Today's session was particularly important because Admiral Thompson, a visiting dignitary from the Pentagon, had requested a demonstration of the unit's capabilities. Admiral Thompson was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. His chest was adorned with numerous ribbons and medals, each telling a story of valor and service. At 58, he had spent most of his adult life climbing the ranks of the naval hierarchy. However, his extensive experience was primarily in naval operations and administrative duties. His knowledge of ground-based weapons systems was limited, though his ego often prevented him from admitting this fact. As Sarah began setting up her equipment, she noticed Admiral Thompson approaching with his entourage of junior officers. The group moved with the crisp precision typical of high-ranking military personnel, their polished boots clicking rhythmically against the concrete pathway. Sarah continued her preparations, checking and rechecking every component of her rifle with the methodical care that had become second nature to her. The .50 caliber rifle she wielded was a marvel of engineering precision. Weighing nearly 30 pounds when fully loaded, it was capable of delivering devastating accuracy at extreme ranges. The weapon required not just physical strength to handle properly, but also an intimate understanding of ballistics, wind patterns, and environmental factors that could affect bullet trajectory. Sarah had spent years mastering every aspect of this particular rifle. She knew exactly how it would behave in different weather conditions, how various ammunition types would perform, and precisely how to adjust for factors that would confuse less experienced shooters. Her logbook contained detailed notes from thousands of rounds fired, creating a comprehensive database of the weapon's characteristics under every conceivable circumstance. Admiral Thompson strode up to Sarah's position with the confidence of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His aide, Lieutenant Collins, followed closely behind, carrying a tablet computer loaded with the Admiral's schedule and various briefing materials. The small group of officers that accompanied them maintained a respectful distance, though their eyes showed keen interest in the upcoming demonstration. "Sergeant Martinez," Admiral Thompson announced in his booming voice, "I've heard impressive reports about your marksmanship abilities. I'm here to see if the reality matches the reputation." Sarah turned to face the Admiral, noting the slight smirk that played at the corners of his mouth. She had encountered this type of skepticism before, particularly from officers who had spent more time behind desks than in active field conditions. Her response was measured and professional, betraying none of the annoyance she felt at his condescending tone. "I'll do my best to demonstrate our unit's capabilities, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady and respectful. She gestured toward the rifle range, where 6 targets had been positioned at varying distances and elevations. "I've prepared a standard long-range accuracy demonstration using 6 targets at distances ranging from 600 to 1,100 meters." Admiral Thompson examined the targets through a pair of high-powered binoculars, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to something approaching interest. The targets appeared impossibly small through the magnification, and he began to understand the difficulty of the task that lay ahead. However, his years in command had taught him never to show uncertainty in front of subordinates. "Impressive setup," he acknowledged grudgingly. "I assume you'll be using standard military ammunition?" "Yes, sir. Match-grade .50 BMG rounds, each one individually inspected for consistency and accuracy." Sarah's reply was crisp and professional, though she couldn't help but notice the Admiral's obvious unfamiliarity with the technical aspects of precision shooting. As Sarah continued her final preparations, Admiral Thompson watched with growing fascination. He observed how she methodically checked the rifle's scope settings, adjusted for wind conditions using a small handheld device, and consulted a data card filled with handwritten notations. The level of technical precision required was far beyond anything he had imagined. Lieutenant Collins approached Admiral Thompson with a question about their next appointment, but the Admiral waved him away impatiently. Something about this demonstration had captured his attention in a way that surprised him. Perhaps it was the obvious competence Sarah displayed, or maybe it was simply intellectual curiosity about a weapons system he had never fully understood. Sarah positioned herself behind the rifle, settling into the shooting position with fluid grace. Her body seemed to meld with the weapon, creating a stable platform that could deliver the precision required for extreme-range shooting. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate through techniques learned over years of training. The first target sat 600 meters downrange, a relatively easy shot for someone of Sarah's caliber. She peered through the scope, making minute adjustments to account for the slight crosswind that had developed since she began her setup. Her finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure while maintaining perfect sight alignment. The rifle's report echoed across the range like thunder, the massive muzzle brake directing gases away from the shooter while reducing felt recoil. Even experienced soldiers flinched at the tremendous noise, but Sarah remained motionless, already tracking her bullet's flight path toward the distant target. Through his binoculars, Admiral Thompson watched in amazement as the bullet struck the target dead center, tearing a precise hole through the bullseye. His expression shifted from mild interest to genuine surprise. He had expected competence, but the level of precision he had just witnessed exceeded his expectations significantly. "Outstanding shot," he called out, though his voice carried a note of surprise that he hadn't intended to reveal. Sarah acknowledged the compliment with a brief nod before turning her attention to the second target, positioned 750 meters away. The second shot followed the same methodical routine. Sarah checked her calculations, adjusted for the increased distance, and squeezed the trigger with the same deliberate precision. The result was identical to the first shot, a perfect center hit that drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled officers. Admiral Thompson found himself moving closer to Sarah's position, drawn by a combination of professional curiosity and something approaching admiration. He had witnessed many weapons demonstrations during his career, but few had displayed such obvious mastery of the equipment involved. As Sarah prepared for her third shot, Admiral Thompson's curiosity got the better of him. "Sergeant, may I ask about your technique? I'm particularly interested in how you account for environmental factors at these ranges." Sarah paused in her preparations, surprised by the genuine interest in the Admiral's question. Most high-ranking officers she had encountered were more concerned with results than methodology. She turned to face him, noting the focused attention in his eyes. "Wind is the primary factor at these distances, sir," she explained. "I use this wind meter to measure speed and direction, but you also have to read the vegetation along the bullet's path to identify any changes in wind patterns. Temperature affects air density, which influences bullet drop, and humidity can affect the bullet's flight characteristics." Admiral Thompson listened intently, clearly fascinated by the complexity of factors involved in precision shooting. His questions revealed both genuine curiosity and a surprising lack of knowledge about the technical aspects of marksmanship. Sarah found herself warming to his interest, appreciating the opportunity to share her expertise with someone who seemed genuinely eager to learn. The third target, positioned 850 meters away, presented additional challenges due to its elevated position on a small hill. Sarah explained how she had to account for the angle of the shot, which affected both the bullet's trajectory and the apparent distance to the target. Admiral Thompson watched closely as she made the necessary calculations, clearly impressed by the mathematical precision required. When Sarah fired the third round, Admiral Thompson was watching through his binoculars, positioned to observe both the shooter and the target simultaneously. He saw the muzzle flash, felt the concussive blast of the rifle's report, and watched the bullet's impact at the distant target. The precision of the shot left him genuinely amazed. "Remarkable," he murmured, lowering his binoculars. "I had no idea this level of precision was achievable at such ranges." Sarah smiled slightly, pleased by the Admiral's obvious appreciation for her skills. She had always enjoyed sharing her knowledge with genuinely interested students, regardless of their rank or position. Teaching others helped her better understand her own techniques and often led to insights that improved her own performance. As she prepared for the fourth shot, Admiral Thompson continued his questioning. He wanted to understand the rifle itself, asking about its specifications, ammunition characteristics, and maintenance requirements. Sarah answered each question thoroughly, demonstrating the deep understanding that came from years of working with the weapon system. The fourth target sat 950 meters away, near the maximum effective range for most shooters. At this distance, even small errors in calculation or technique would result in complete misses. Sarah took extra time with her preparations, double-checking every calculation and environmental factor that could affect the shot's outcome. Admiral Thompson watched the preparation process with growing appreciation for the skill involved. He began to understand that what he was witnessing was not just marksmanship, but a demonstration of applied physics, meteorology, and engineering principles. The level of knowledge required was far beyond what he had initially imagined. When Sarah fired the fourth round, Admiral Thompson held his breath, watching through the binoculars as the bullet traveled its long arc toward the distant target. The impact, another perfect center hit, drew spontaneous applause from the assembled officers. Even Admiral Thompson found himself clapping, caught up in the excitement of witnessing such exceptional skill. "I'm beginning to understand why your reputation preceded you, Sergeant," Admiral Thompson said, his tone now carrying genuine respect rather than the skeptical condescension of earlier. "This level of precision is truly remarkable." Sarah felt a surge of pride at the Admiral's words. Recognition from senior officers was always meaningful, but praise from someone who clearly understood the difficulty of what she was accomplishing carried special weight. She began to think that perhaps this demonstration would go better than she had initially expected. The fifth target, positioned 1,050 meters away, represented a significant challenge even for Sarah's exceptional skills. At this distance, the bullet would take more than a second to reach its target, allowing time for multiple environmental factors to affect its flight path. Sarah spent several minutes studying conditions, making calculations, and preparing for what would be her most difficult shot of the demonstration. Admiral Thompson moved closer to observe Sarah's preparation routine, fascinated by the methodical approach she employed. He asked questions about specific techniques, showing genuine interest in understanding the science behind precision shooting. Sarah found his enthusiasm infectious, and she explained her methods in detail. As Sarah settled behind the rifle for the fifth shot, Admiral Thompson positioned himself where he could observe both the shooter and the target. He watched as she controlled her breathing, steadied her position, and applied gradual pressure to the trigger. The rifle's report seemed even louder in the morning air, and everyone present watched intently as the bullet began its long journey toward the distant target. Through his binoculars, Admiral Thompson witnessed another perfect hit, the bullet striking the target's center ring with mathematical precision. The demonstration of skill was so impressive that it transcended his initial skepticism entirely. He found himself genuinely excited about the final shot, eager to see if Sarah could maintain her perfect record. 5 for 5, Admiral Thompson announced to the group, his voice carrying unmistakable admiration. "I have to admit, Sergeant Martinez, you've exceeded every expectation I had coming into this demonstration." Sarah felt a warm glow of satisfaction at the Admiral's words. The demonstration was proceeding exactly as she had hoped, and she could see that her exceptional skills were making the impression she had intended. The final target, positioned at 1,100 meters, would be her most challenging shot, but she felt confident in her ability to complete the perfect demonstration. As Sarah began preparing for the final shot, Admiral Thompson's curiosity reached its peak. He had been thoroughly impressed by what he had witnessed, but something about the rifle itself had captured his imagination. The weapon represented power and precision in a way that appealed to his military sensibilities. "Sergeant," Admiral Thompson said, stepping closer to Sarah's position, "would it be possible for me to examine the rifle more closely? I'd like to better understand the weapon system that enables such remarkable precision." Sarah paused in her preparations, considering the request. Allowing others to handle her rifle was something she approached cautiously, as even small changes to the weapon's setup could affect its accuracy. However, the Admiral's genuine interest and respectful demeanor throughout the demonstration had earned her trust. "Certainly, sir," Sarah replied. "If you'd like, I can show you the rifle's key features after I complete this final shot. The weapon is currently zeroed for these specific conditions, and I'd prefer to complete the demonstration before making any adjustments." Admiral Thompson nodded understandingly, but his eagerness was clearly visible. He positioned himself slightly behind and to the side of Sarah's shooting position, studying the rifle's configuration with obvious fascination. The weapon's precision engineering and obvious quality had captured his imagination in a way that surprised him. Sarah settled into position for her final shot, aware that Admiral Thompson was watching closely. The last target, positioned at the maximum range, would require every bit of her skill and experience to hit successfully. She took her time with the calculations, accounting for the slight changes in wind conditions that had occurred during the demonstration. As she prepared to fire, Sarah felt the weight of expectation from the assembled officers. A perfect 6 for 6 performance would be the ideal conclusion to an already impressive demonstration. She controlled her breathing, steadied her position, and began applying pressure to the trigger with the same methodical precision she had employed for the previous 5 shots. The rifle's report echoed across the range one final time, and all eyes turned toward the distant target. Through his binoculars, Admiral Thompson watched as Sarah's final bullet struck the target's center, completing a flawless demonstration of marksmanship excellence. The assembled officers erupted in spontaneous applause, clearly impressed by what they had witnessed. "Perfect," Admiral Thompson announced, lowering his binoculars with obvious satisfaction. 6 targets, 6 perfect hits. That was truly an exceptional demonstration, Sergeant Martinez. Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief as she completed the demonstration successfully. The perfect performance would reflect well on her unit and validate the training methods she had worked so hard to develop. She began the process of making the rifle safe, following the same methodical routine she employed after every shooting session. It was at this moment that Admiral Thompson's earlier fascination with the rifle overcame his better judgment. Instead of waiting for Sarah to complete her safety procedures and offer to show him the weapon, he reached toward the rifle with obvious intention to examine it more closely. "Now, let me take a look at this remarkable weapon," Admiral Thompson said, his hands already moving toward the rifle before Sarah could respond to his intentions. The moment his fingers made contact with her rifle, Sarah's training and protective instincts took over. This was her personal weapon, precisely configured for her use, and she had spent years developing the perfect setup for maximum accuracy. More importantly, the rifle was still loaded and had not yet been made completely safe according to proper protocols. Sarah's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Her hands moved to intercept Admiral Thompson's reach, grasping his wrists firmly, but not aggressively. Her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority as she spoke the words that would define this moment. "Sir, hands off my rifle," she said clearly, her grip tightening on the Admiral's wrist to prevent him from making contact with the weapon. "The rifle is still hot and hasn't been made safe according to proper protocols." Admiral Thompson's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching indignation. In his many years of command, few people had ever physically prevented him from doing something he intended to do. The sensation of having his hands restrained, even gently, triggered an immediate response that had more to do with wounded pride than rational thought. "Sergeant, I believe you're forgetting who you're speaking to," Admiral Thompson said, his voice carrying a warning tone. He attempted to pull his hands free from Sarah's grip, but found that her hold, while not painful, was remarkably firm. Sarah's military training had included extensive close combat instruction, and her years of handling heavy weapons had given her considerable physical strength. Admiral Thompson, despite his imposing presence and authoritative demeanor, was primarily an administrative officer whose physical conditioning had declined with age and desk assignments. "Sir, I'm following proper safety protocols," Sarah replied firmly, maintaining her grip on the Admiral's wrists. "This weapon cannot be handled by unauthorized personnel until it has been properly cleared and made safe. These are standard regulations that apply regardless of rank." The confrontation had attracted the attention of every officer present. Lieutenant Collins looked horrified at the unprecedented sight of an enlisted soldier physically restraining an admiral. The other officers watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, uncertain how to respond to such an unusual situation. Admiral Thompson's face began to redden as he realized the implications of the situation. Here he was, a senior naval officer, being physically restrained by an enlisted soldier in full view of his subordinates. His ego, already bruised by his obvious lack of knowledge about the weapon system, could not tolerate this additional humiliation. "Sergeant Martinez, you will release me immediately," Admiral Thompson commanded, his voice rising with anger. "I am ordering you to step aside and allow me to examine this weapon." Sarah's grip remained firm, her expression calm but determined. She had spent her entire military career following proper procedures and safety protocols, and she was not about to compromise those standards, regardless of who was giving the orders. "Sir, I cannot comply with that order, Sarah replied respectfully but firmly. Safety regulations prohibit unauthorized handling of loaded weapons, and those regulations do not contain exceptions based on rank. I will be happy to demonstrate the rifle's features once it has been properly secured. The standoff continued for several tense seconds, with Admiral Thompson struggling against Sarah's grip while she maintained her hold with calm determination. The assembled officers watched in stunned silence, witnessing a confrontation that challenged every assumption about military hierarchy and protocol. Admiral Thompson's struggles gradually intensified as his anger grew. His attempts to break free became more forceful, though Sarah's superior position and training allowed her to maintain control of the situation. The physical confrontation was taking place directly over the loaded rifle, creating a dangerous situation that concerned every observant officer present. "This is insubordination," Admiral Thompson declared, his voice now carrying genuine fury. "I will see you court-martialed for laying hands on a superior officer." Sarah's response was measured and professional, despite the increasingly volatile situation. "Sir, I am following established safety protocols and preventing a potentially dangerous situation. I am willing to accept any consequences for following proper procedures." The confrontation reached its climax as Admiral Thompson made one final, forceful attempt to break free from Sarah's restraining grip. His sudden movement caused him to lose his balance slightly, and for a moment it appeared that he might fall across the rifle. Sarah's protective instincts kicked in completely, and she used her leverage and superior positioning to guide the Admiral away from the weapon. With a swift, controlled movement that demonstrated her close combat training, Sarah broke Admiral Thompson's grip and simultaneously moved him away from the rifle. The technique was efficient and professional, designed to end the confrontation without causing injury while maintaining control of the dangerous situation. Admiral Thompson stumbled slightly as he regained his balance, his face now flushed with anger and embarrassment. The realization that he had been outmaneuvered by an enlisted soldier in front of his subordinates was a humiliation he had never anticipated experiencing. Sarah immediately moved to secure her rifle, following proper safety procedures with the same methodical precision she had displayed throughout the shooting demonstration. Her movements were calm and professional, showing no signs of the adrenaline that must have been coursing through her system. The assembled officers stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The confrontation had lasted only seconds, but its implications would resonate far beyond the immediate moment. Questions of authority, protocol, and proper military conduct would need to be addressed in ways that none of them had anticipated. Admiral Thompson straightened his uniform and attempted to regain his composure, though his flushed face and rapid breathing betrayed his emotional state. The humiliation of being outmaneuvered by an enlisted soldier was compounded by the realization that she had been correct about the safety protocols throughout the confrontation. Lieutenant Collins approached cautiously, uncertain how to address the unprecedented situation. His training had not prepared him for a scenario where proper military protocol conflicted so dramatically with traditional concepts of rank and authority. Sarah completed her safety procedures and turned to face Admiral Thompson, her expression respectful but unwavering. The rifle was now properly secured, eliminating the safety concerns that had prompted her protective actions. "Sir, the weapon is now safe for examination," Sarah announced professionally. "I apologize for any inconvenience, but I could not permit unsafe handling of a loaded weapon, regardless of circumstances." Admiral Thompson's response would set the tone for everything that followed. The confrontation had created a situation where traditional military hierarchy had been challenged by legitimate safety concerns, and the resolution would have implications far beyond this single incident. The morning sun continued to shine down on the training range, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. What had begun as a routine weapons demonstration had evolved into something much more significant, a moment that would be remembered and discussed long after the participants had left the range. As the tension hung in the air like smoke from the rifle's barrel, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented. The question now was how the aftermath would unfold, and whether Admiral Thompson would recognize the legitimacy of Sarah's actions or allow his wounded pride to dictate his response. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only the individuals involved, but the very principles of military discipline, safety, and proper conduct under pressure. The outcome would depend on whether cooler heads prevailed or whether the Admiral's embarrassment would escalate the situation beyond any reasonable resolution. The silence that followed Sarah's professional announcement stretched across the training range like a taut wire ready to snap. Admiral Thompson stood motionless, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he struggled to process what had just occurred. The assembled officers remained frozen in place, their eyes darting between their commanding officer and the enlisted soldier who had just physically restrained him. Lieutenant Collins stepped forward tentatively, his face pale with the realization that he was witnessing a career-defining moment for everyone involved. His hand moved instinctively toward his communication device, uncertain whether he should document the incident or attempt to defuse the situation before it escalated further. Admiral Thompson's years of command experience had taught him to maintain composure under pressure, but this situation fell outside every scenario he had ever encountered. The combination of public embarrassment, challenged authority, and the grudging recognition that Sarah had been technically correct created a perfect storm of conflicting emotions. "Sergeant Martinez," Admiral Thompson began, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger burning in his eyes, "I want you to understand the gravity of what just transpired. You have physically assaulted a superior officer in full view of witnesses." Sarah's expression remained calm and respectful, though those who knew her well could detect the steel beneath her diplomatic exterior. Her military training had prepared her for many difficult situations, but none quite like this one. She understood that her career hung in the balance, yet she felt no regret about her actions. "Sir, with respect, I restrained you to prevent a safety violation," Sarah replied evenly. "At no time did I assault you. I used the minimum force necessary to prevent unsafe handling of a loaded weapon. These actions were consistent with my training and military regulations regarding weapons safety." The technical accuracy of Sarah's statement only served to inflame Admiral Thompson's anger further. He had been outmaneuvered both physically and intellectually, and the presence of witnesses made the situation exponentially worse. His reputation as a decisive leader was being challenged in the most public way possible. Major Rodriguez, the range officer who had been observing from a distance, approached the group with obvious reluctance. As the senior officer responsible for range safety, he was caught between supporting his subordinates' correct actions and maintaining respect for the visiting admiral's authority. "Admiral Thompson, sir," Major Rodriguez interjected carefully. "Sergeant Martinez was indeed following proper safety protocols. Range regulations require that all weapons be properly cleared before being handled by personnel other than the assigned operator." Admiral Thompson's gaze shifted to Major Rodriguez, and for a moment it appeared that his anger might find a new target. The Major's diplomatic intervention was technically supportive of Sarah's actions, though he had phrased it in a way designed to minimize the Admiral's embarrassment. "Major, are you suggesting that I was unaware of proper safety protocols?" Admiral Thompson's question carried a dangerous edge, clearly challenging the Major to choose sides in an increasingly volatile situation. Major Rodriguez found himself walking a diplomatic tightrope, trying to support proper procedures while avoiding direct confrontation with a superior officer. His years of experience had taught him that sometimes the right answer was also the most dangerous one. "Not at all, sir," Major Rodriguez replied carefully. "I'm simply explaining that Sergeant Martinez was following the specific protocols we've established for this range. Her actions, while perhaps surprising, were consistent with her training and responsibilities as the weapon operator." Sarah appreciated Major Rodriguez's support, though she recognized that he was taking a significant risk by backing her actions. The Major's career could be damaged just as severely as her own if Admiral Thompson decided to make this incident a matter of formal disciplinary action. Admiral Thompson turned his attention back to Sarah, studying her face for any sign of insubordination or disrespect. What he saw instead was the calm professionalism of a dedicated soldier who believed completely in the correctness of her actions. This recognition only made his anger more complex and difficult to resolve. "Sergeant, do you understand that your actions could be interpreted as an attack on military discipline itself?" Admiral Thompson asked, his voice carrying a mixture of authority and genuine curiosity about her response. Sarah considered her words carefully before responding. She understood that her answer could determine not only her own fate, but potentially influence how similar situations might be handled in the future. The precedent being set could affect every soldier who might someday face a conflict between safety and hierarchy. "Sir, I believe my actions supported military discipline by prioritizing safety and Proper procedures over personal considerations, Sarah replied thoughtfully. Military discipline should never require soldiers to compromise safety protocols, regardless of who is giving orders that conflict with established procedures. The intellectual challenge implicit in Sarah's response struck Admiral Thompson like a physical blow. She was essentially arguing that true military discipline required soldiers to sometimes resist the orders of superior officers when those orders conflicted with established safety procedures. Lieutenant Collins watched the exchange with growing alarm, recognizing that the conversation was moving beyond a simple disciplinary incident into questions of fundamental military philosophy. His training had not prepared him for a situation where enlisted personnel and senior officers engaged in philosophical debates about the nature of military authority. Captain Williams, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up in an attempt to provide a face-saving solution for all parties involved. His diplomatic experience suggested that the situation needed to be de-escalated before it spiraled completely out of control. Admiral Thompson, perhaps we could arrange for a proper weapons familiarization session at a later time, Captain Williams suggested diplomatically. Sergeant Martinez could provide a comprehensive briefing on the weapon system under controlled conditions. Admiral Thompson's expression suggested that he was not interested in diplomatic solutions that failed to address the fundamental challenge to his authority. The offer of a future briefing seemed inadequate given the public nature of the confrontation that had just occurred. Captain, the issue is not my unfamiliarity with the weapon, Admiral Thompson replied sharply. The issue is an enlisted soldier physically preventing a superior officer from examining military equipment. That level of insubordination cannot be overlooked or diplomatically resolved. Sarah understood that Admiral Thompson was correct about one crucial point. The incident had created a precedent that would be difficult to ignore. Either her actions would be vindicated as proper adherence to safety protocols, or they would be condemned as unacceptable insubordination. The assembled officers continued to watch in uncomfortable silence, each recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in their military experience. The outcome would likely influence how they approached similar situations throughout the remainder of their careers. Major Rodriguez made another attempt to defuse the situation by focusing on the technical aspects of the confrontation rather than its implications for military hierarchy. His approach was designed to provide both parties with a path toward resolution. Admiral Thompson, if I may suggest, Major Rodriguez began cautiously. Perhaps we could review the range safety protocols together. This might help clarify the specific regulations that govern Sergeant Martinez's actions. Admiral Thompson's response made it clear that he was not interested in technical discussions that might further validate Sarah's behavior. His focus remained firmly fixed on the challenge to his authority rather than the safety concerns that had motivated the confrontation. Major, I am fully capable of understanding safety protocols, Admiral Thompson stated firmly. What I cannot accept is the presumption that an enlisted soldier has the authority to physically restrain a flag officer based on her interpretation of those protocols. Sarah realized that Admiral Thompson's position was fundamentally about authority rather than safety. His objection was not to the existence of safety protocols, but to her assumption that those protocols applied to him in the same way they applied to junior personnel. The philosophical implications of this position were staggering. If senior officers were exempt from safety protocols based on their rank, then the entire foundation of military safety procedures would be undermined. Sarah understood that much more was at stake than her individual career. Sir, may I ask a question? Sarah requested respectfully, recognizing that she was taking an enormous risk by continuing to engage with the Admiral on this topic. Admiral Thompson's expression suggested surprise at her request, but he nodded curtly, apparently curious about what question she might dare to ask under these circumstances. Do safety protocols apply equally to all personnel, regardless of rank? Sarah asked simply, her voice carrying no challenge or disrespect, only genuine inquiry about a fundamental military principle. The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before a medieval court. Everyone present understood that Admiral Thompson's answer would establish a precedent with far-reaching implications for military safety procedures and command authority. Admiral Thompson found himself in an impossible position. If he answered that safety protocols applied equally to everyone, he would essentially validate Sarah's actions and undermine his own position. If he answered that senior officers were exempt from such protocols, he would be establishing a dangerous precedent that could lead to serious safety violations. The silence stretched for several long seconds as Admiral Thompson weighed his options. The assembled officers waited for his response, understanding that his answer would define the resolution of this unprecedented confrontation. Lieutenant Collins shifted nervously, recognizing that his admiral was facing a question that had no satisfactory answer from his perspective. The lieutenant's loyalty to his superior was being tested by the obvious logic of the sergeant's position. Sergeant Martinez, Admiral Thompson finally replied, "Safety protocols are important, but they must be balanced against the requirements of command authority and military discipline. Senior officers have both the experience and the responsibility to make judgment calls that junior personnel are not qualified to make." Sarah's response was immediate and respectful, but it struck at the heart of Admiral Thompson's argument with surgical precision. "Sir, with respect, the weapon was loaded and had not been cleared according to standard procedures. No amount of experience or authority changes the basic physics of firearms safety. A negligent discharge would be equally dangerous regardless of who caused it." The undeniable logic of Sarah's statement created another moment of uncomfortable silence. Admiral Thompson understood that she was correct about the technical aspects of weapon safety, but accepting this logic would require him to acknowledge that his authority had legitimate limitations. Major Rodriguez sensed an opportunity to support Sarah's position while providing Admiral Thompson with a face-saving explanation. His intervention was carefully designed to validate the safety concerns while acknowledging the Admiral's authority. "Sir, our range safety protocols are designed to protect everyone, including senior officers," Major Rodriguez explained diplomatically. "We found that consistent application of safety procedures, regardless of rank, actually enhances rather than undermines command authority by demonstrating institutional commitment to protecting all personnel." Admiral Thompson's expression suggested that he was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation he had created. His initial anger was slowly being replaced by a more nuanced understanding of the competing interests at stake. Captain Williams seized the moment to offer another diplomatic solution, hoping to provide both parties with a path toward resolution that preserved everyone's dignity and career prospects. "Perhaps," Captain Williams suggested carefully, "we could frame this incident as an example of exceptional dedication to safety protocols rather than as a disciplinary matter." Sergeant Martinez's actions, while unusual, did prevent a potential safety violation. Admiral Thompson considered this suggestion for several moments, recognizing that it offered him an opportunity to escape from the corner he had painted himself into. However, his wounded pride continued to resist any resolution that failed to address his public embarrassment. Sarah watched Admiral Thompson's internal struggle with professional detachment, understanding that her fate largely depended on his ability to set aside his personal feelings in favor of the larger institutional interests at stake. The sun had climbed higher during their confrontation, and the heat was beginning to build on the exposed training range. The physical discomfort added another layer of tension to an already volatile situation, making everyone eager for some form of resolution. Lieutenant Collins approached Admiral Thompson cautiously, carrying his communication device and wearing an expression that suggested he had received some form of urgent message. His interruption would prove to be either perfectly timed or potentially disastrous, depending on Admiral Thompson's current state of mind. "Admiral Thompson, sir," Lieutenant Collins said quietly, "we've received a message from General Morrison's office. He's requesting an immediate update on the weapons demonstration and asks that you call him at your earliest convenience." The mention of General Morrison's name had an immediate effect on Admiral Thompson's demeanor. The general was not only his superior officer, but also someone whose opinion carried significant weight in determining future assignments and career advancement. Admiral Thompson realized that news of the confrontation had likely already reached higher command levels, making it even more important that he handle the resolution carefully. Any decision he made would be scrutinized by officers whose opinions could make or break his career. "Lieutenant, inform General Morrison's office that the demonstration was exceptionally successful and that I will provide a detailed report within the hour," Admiral Thompson replied, his voice carrying a note of decision that suggested he had reached some form of conclusion about how to proceed. Sarah sensed the shift in Admiral Thompson's attitude and hoped that the intervention of higher authority might provide an opportunity for a more rational resolution to their confrontation. The prospect of explaining the incident to General Morrison might give the Admiral the motivation he needed to find a face-saving solution. Admiral Thompson turned back to face Sarah, his expression now reflecting a complex mixture of anger, grudging respect, and strategic calculation. The next few minutes would determine whether this incident would end her career or somehow transform into a validation of her professional competence. Sergeant Martinez, Admiral Thompson began, his voice now carrying a more measured tone than it had since the confrontation began. I want you to understand something very clearly. What happened here today was unprecedented in my experience. Sarah nodded respectfully, uncertain whether this statement was the prelude to severe disciplinary action or an acknowledgement of the unique circumstances that had created their confrontation. However, Admiral Thompson continued, I am beginning to understand that your actions, while highly unusual, may have been motivated by legitimate safety concerns rather than simple insubordination. The relief that washed over Major Rodriguez was visible to everyone present. Admiral Thompson's acknowledgement of the safety concerns provided the foundation for a resolution that might preserve everyone's career prospects and institutional reputation. Sarah remained at attention, unwilling to show any reaction until Admiral Thompson had finished his statement. She understood that his words were being carefully chosen and that any premature response on her part could still derail a potentially positive resolution. I am willing to consider this incident closed, Admiral Thompson continued, provided that certain conditions are met. First, you will provide me with a complete technical briefing on this weapon system, conducted under proper protocols. Second, you will prepare a written report documenting the safety procedures that governed your actions today. The conditions Admiral Thompson proposed were entirely reasonable and actually provided Sarah with an opportunity to demonstrate her expertise in a more controlled environment. She felt a surge of relief that the Admiral was choosing a path toward resolution rather than escalation. Yes, sir, Sarah replied immediately. I would be honored to provide you with a comprehensive briefing on the weapon system and its safety procedures. Admiral Thompson nodded curtly, though his expression suggested that his wounded pride had not been entirely assuaged by this diplomatic resolution. The public nature of his embarrassment would continue to rankle, regardless of how professionally the incident was ultimately resolved. Major Rodriguez stepped forward to offer his support for the proposed resolution, recognizing that it provided the best possible outcome for all parties involved. His diplomatic intervention had helped create the conditions for a face-saving compromise. Admiral Thompson, I believe Sergeant Martinez can provide you with one of the most comprehensive weapons briefings available anywhere in the military, Major Rodriguez stated confidently. Her knowledge of this system is truly exceptional. The compliment served dual purposes, acknowledging Sarah's expertise while providing Admiral Thompson with additional justification for accepting the resolution. It also helped frame the future briefing as a valuable learning opportunity rather than a concession to Sarah's earlier actions. Captain Williams also offered his support for the proposed solution, recognizing that it provided the best path forward for maintaining unit cohesion and avoiding the long-term consequences of a formal disciplinary action. Sir, I think this approach demonstrates excellent leadership in turning a difficult situation into a positive learning opportunity, Captain Williams stated diplomatically. Admiral Thompson accepted these supportive comments with a curt nod, though his body language suggested that he was still processing the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. The transition from anger to diplomatic resolution was requiring significant mental and emotional adjustment. Sarah understood that Admiral Thompson's acceptance of this resolution represented a significant act of professional maturity, especially given the public nature of his initial embarrassment. She felt genuine respect for his ability to set aside his personal feelings in favor of institutional interests. Lieutenant Collins approached Admiral Thompson with obvious relief, recognizing that the diplomatic resolution would eliminate the need for him to document a highly problematic incident involving his superior officer. His loyalty to the Admiral had been preserved while avoiding a potential career-ending situation. The assembled officers began to relax slightly as the immediate tension of the confrontation gradually dissipated. However, everyone understood that the underlying issues raised by the incident would continue to reverberate through their individual understanding of military authority and safety protocols. Admiral Thompson made one final statement that would define the official interpretation of the morning's events. His words were clearly intended to provide a narrative that preserved everyone's reputation while acknowledging the legitimacy of the safety concerns that had precipitated the confrontation. Let the record show, Admiral Thompson announced formally, that Sergeant Martinez demonstrated exceptional commitment to safety protocols during today's weapons demonstration. While her methods were highly unusual, her dedication to proper procedures is commendable. The formal statement provided the official interpretation that would be recorded in any reports generated about the incident. Admiral Thompson had chosen to frame Sarah's actions as commendable rather than insubordinate, effectively transforming a potential disciplinary disaster into a positive example of safety consciousness. Sarah felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude at Admiral Thompson's generous interpretation of her actions. The Admiral's decision to choose institutional success over personal revenge demonstrated the kind of leadership she had always hoped to encounter in senior officers. Major Rodriguez immediately stepped forward to express his agreement with Admiral Thompson's assessment, providing additional official support for the positive interpretation of the morning's events. "Sir, I completely concur with that assessment," Major Rodriguez stated firmly. Sergeant Martinez's actions exemplify the highest standards of safety consciousness and professional dedication. The unanimous support from the senior officers present would ensure that any future discussion of the incident would be framed in positive terms rather than as a disciplinary matter. Admiral Thompson's leadership in choosing this interpretation had preserved everyone's career prospects while establishing important precedents for future similar situations. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah began to understand the broader implications of what had just occurred. The confrontation had tested fundamental principles of military authority and safety, ultimately reinforcing the importance of proper procedures while demonstrating that reasonable resolution was possible even in the most challenging circumstances. Admiral Thompson's final words before leaving the range would be remembered by everyone present as an example of how leadership sometimes required the subordination of personal feelings to institutional interests and long-term mission success. 3 days after the confrontation at the shooting range, Sarah found herself standing outside Admiral Thompson's temporary office, carrying a comprehensive briefing package that represented hours of meticulous preparation. The intervening time had allowed both parties to process the events and approach their upcoming meeting with more professional objectivity than had been possible in the immediate aftermath of their confrontation. Sarah's briefing materials included detailed technical specifications, maintenance protocols, ballistic charts, and training curricula that she had developed over years of working with the .50 caliber rifle system. She had approached this preparation with the same methodical precision that characterized all aspects of her professional work, recognizing that this briefing represented both an opportunity and a test. Admiral Thompson had spent the previous evening reviewing his own notes about the weapons demonstration, trying to understand how his initial fascination with the rifle had led to such an unprecedented confrontation. His years of command experience had taught him the value of learning from difficult situations, and he was determined to approach this briefing with genuine intellectual curiosity rather than wounded pride. Lieutenant Collins escorted Sarah into the Admiral's office, his demeanor reflecting the professional reset that had occurred since their last encounter. The office was spartanly furnished but organized with military precision, reflecting Admiral Thompson's preference for functional efficiency over decorative comfort. Admiral Thompson looked up from his desk as Sarah entered, his expression neutral but attentive. The anger and embarrassment that had characterized their previous interaction had been replaced by professional curiosity and what appeared to be genuine interest in the promised technical briefing. "Sergeant Martinez," Admiral Thompson acknowledged formally, gesturing toward a chair positioned across from his desk. "I understand you've prepared a comprehensive briefing on the weapon system. I'm interested to learn more about the technical aspects that enable such remarkable precision." Sarah took the offered seat and arranged her briefing materials with practiced efficiency. The formal setting provided a more appropriate environment for the kind of detailed technical discussion that had been impossible during their confrontational encounter at the shooting range. "Sir, I've prepared a complete overview of the M107, a 1.50 caliber rifle system," Sarah began, opening her first briefing folder. "This includes technical specifications, ballistic performance data, maintenance requirements, and training protocols that we've developed for optimal accuracy at extended ranges." Admiral Thompson leaned forward slightly, his attention clearly focused on the materials Sarah was presenting. His genuine interest in the technical details was evident, suggesting that his earlier desire to examine the rifle had indeed been motivated by professional curiosity rather than simple ego. Sarah began with the rifle's basic specifications, explaining the engineering principles that enabled such precise long-range performance. Her presentation was structured like a formal military briefing, with clear sections covering each aspect of the weapon system in logical progression. The M107A1 weighs approximately 28.5 pounds unloaded, Sarah explained, referring to her technical charts. The barrel length is 29 inches, and the overall length is 48.5 inches. These specifications are optimized for accuracy rather than portability, which is why the weapon requires specialized training for effective employment. Admiral Thompson took notes as Sarah spoke, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his growing understanding of the weapon system's complexity. His questions revealed both genuine intellectual curiosity and a systematic approach to understanding how technical specifications translated into operational capabilities. The ballistic performance of this system is remarkable, Sarah continued, turning to a detailed chart showing bullet trajectories at various ranges. Using match-grade .50 BMG ammunition, we can achieve consistent accuracy at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters under optimal conditions. Admiral Thompson studied the ballistic charts with obvious fascination, asking detailed questions about how environmental factors affected bullet performance. His questions demonstrated that he was beginning to understand the scientific complexity behind precision shooting. "Sergeant, help me understand how you account for all these variables during actual shooting," Admiral Thompson requested. "The number of factors that can affect bullet trajectory seems almost overwhelming." Sarah appreciated the Admiral's question because it allowed her to explain the systematic approach that she had developed for managing the complexity of long-range shooting. Her response would demonstrate the intellectual rigor required for consistent accuracy. "Sir, successful long-range shooting requires a combination of technical knowledge, mathematical calculation, and practical experience," Sarah explained. "We use standardized procedures to gather environmental data, then apply established formulas to calculate the necessary adjustments." She produced a laminated data card covered with handwritten notations and formulas. The card represented years of practical experience distilled into a reference tool that could be used under field conditions. "This data card contains the specific adjustments required for this rifle under various environmental conditions," Sarah explained, handing the card to Admiral Thompson for examination. Each entry represents multiple shots under controlled conditions, creating a database of the rifle's performance characteristics. Admiral Thompson examined the data card with obvious respect for the meticulous record keeping it represented. The level of detail and systematic organization demonstrated a scientific approach to marksmanship that exceeded his previous understanding of the discipline. "This level of documentation is impressive," Admiral Thompson observed. "How long did it take you to develop this database?" "Approximately 3 years of consistent shooting and data collection, sir," Sarah replied. "Every range session contributes additional data points that help refine the accuracy of our predictions. The goal is to eliminate as much uncertainty as possible through systematic preparation." Admiral Thompson's questions became increasingly sophisticated as he began to understand the interplay between technical knowledge and practical skill. His interest appeared to be genuine rather than perfunctory, suggesting that the briefing was achieving its intended educational objectives. Sarah proceeded to explain the maintenance requirements that kept the rifle functioning at peak accuracy. She demonstrated the cleaning procedures, parts inspection protocols, and periodic accuracy testing that ensured consistent performance. "Precision rifles require significantly more maintenance than standard infantry weapons," Sarah explained while demonstrating the cleaning procedure. "The tolerances are much tighter, and small changes in the rifle's condition can have measurable effects on accuracy." Admiral Thompson watched the maintenance demonstration intently, asking questions about specific procedures and their importance for maintaining accuracy. His questions revealed a growing appreciation for the technical discipline required to maintain such a complex weapon system. "The scope system is equally critical," Sarah continued, moving to explain the optical equipment mounted on the rifle. "This is a variable power telescope with a maximum magnification of 25 power, equipped with target turrets that allow precise adjustments for range and windage." She demonstrated the scope's adjustment procedures, explaining how the precision mechanics allowed shooters to make repeatable adjustments measured in fractions of an inch at extreme ranges. Admiral Thompson's fascination with the precision engineering was evident in his detailed questions about the optical system. "Sergeant, what level of training is required for operators to achieve proficiency with this system?" Admiral Thompson asked, clearly thinking about the broader implications of the weapon's complexity. Sarah's response addressed both the technical training requirements and the time investment necessary for developing genuine expertise with the weapon system. Initial qualification requires approximately 200 hours of instruction, sir, Sarah explained. This includes classroom instruction on ballistics and environmental factors, extensive practice with range calculations, and supervised firing exercises. However, developing true expertise requires several years of consistent practice and continued education. Admiral Thompson's expression suggested that he was beginning to understand why his attempt to casually examine the rifle had been inappropriate. The weapon system's complexity required specialized knowledge and careful procedures that could not be safely ignored, regardless of one's rank or authority. Sarah proceeded to explain the training curriculum she had developed for new operators, emphasizing the safety protocols that formed the foundation of all instruction. Her presentation made it clear that safety considerations were integrated into every aspect of training rather than treated as separate requirements. Safety protocols are not restrictions on the weapon's use, Sarah explained. They are enablers that allow us to employ the system effectively while protecting personnel and equipment. Proper safety procedures actually enhance operational effectiveness rather than limiting it. Admiral Thompson nodded thoughtfully at this explanation, recognizing the implicit reference to their previous confrontation. Sarah's statement provided a professional framework for understanding why safety protocols could not be compromised, even when they conflicted with personal desires or command preferences. The briefing continued with Sarah explaining advanced techniques for extreme-range shooting, including methods for engaging targets at distances beyond normal engagement ranges. Her presentation included examples of successful shots at ranges exceeding 1,200 meters, with detailed explanations of the calculations and procedures required. At extreme ranges, the shooter becomes part of a weapons system that includes meteorological equipment, ballistic computers, and communication systems, Sarah explained. Individual marksmanship skill is necessary, but not sufficient for consistent success at these distances. Admiral Thompson's questions about extreme-range capabilities revealed his interest in understanding the weapon's potential military applications. His queries focused on operational scenarios where such capabilities might provide significant tactical advantages. Sarah's responses demonstrated her understanding of the strategic implications of precision shooting, while maintaining focus on the technical aspects of weapon employment. Her presentation balanced detailed technical information with broader operational considerations. The psychological effect of precision fire can be as important as its physical impact, Sarah noted. Enemy personnel who understand they are vulnerable to accurate fire at extreme ranges must modify their behavior significantly, which can provide substantial tactical advantages. Admiral Thompson appeared particularly interested in this aspect of the weapon's employment, asking detailed questions about how precision shooting capabilities affected enemy tactics and decision-making. His questions revealed a strategic mindset that appreciated the broader implications of technical capabilities. As the briefing progressed, Admiral Thompson's respect for Sarah's expertise became increasingly evident. His questions evolved from basic curiosity to sophisticated inquiries that demonstrated genuine understanding of the subject matter. "Sergeant, I'm beginning to understand why you were so protective of your weapon," Admiral Thompson said during a natural pause in the presentation. "The precision required for this level of performance cannot tolerate casual handling or improvised procedures." Sarah appreciated the Admiral's acknowledgement of the technical rationale behind her previous actions. His statement provided validation that the briefing was achieving its objective of demonstrating the legitimate basis for her adherence to safety protocols. "Sir, every component of the system must function exactly as designed," Sarah replied. "Small variations in any element can cascade into significant accuracy degradation. This is why we follow precise procedures for everything from ammunition storage to scope adjustments." The briefing reached its climax with Sarah's explanation of the training philosophy she had developed for precision shooters. Her approach emphasized systematic skill development, rigorous safety standards, and continuous improvement through detailed performance analysis. Excellence in precision shooting requires the integration of technical knowledge, physical skill, and mental discipline, Sarah explained. None of these elements alone is sufficient, but their combination can produce remarkable results. Admiral Thompson's final questions focused on how the training concepts might be applied to other military specialties. His interest in the broader implications of Sarah's approach suggested that he was thinking about leadership and training principles rather than just marksmanship techniques. "Your systematic approach to skill development could be applied to many other military specialties," Admiral Thompson observed. "The combination of technical mastery, rigorous procedures, and continuous improvement is applicable far beyond marksmanship. Sarah felt gratified that Admiral Thompson understood the broader principles underlying her approach to precision shooting. His recognition that the concepts had wider applicability validated her belief that excellence in any field required the same fundamental commitment to systematic improvement. As the briefing concluded, Admiral Thompson expressed his appreciation for Sarah's thorough presentation and professional expertise. His demeanor had evolved completely from their initial confrontational encounter to genuine respect for her technical competence and instructional ability. "Sergeant Martinez, this has been one of the most educational briefings I've received in years," Admiral Thompson stated formally. "Your expertise and professionalism are truly impressive, and I now understand why your unit has such an outstanding reputation." Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction at the successful completion of the briefing. The Admiral's acknowledgement of her expertise validated her years of dedicated work while demonstrating that their initial confrontation had been transformed into a positive learning experience. The formal conclusion of the briefing marked the beginning of what would become an ongoing professional relationship based on mutual respect rather than the hierarchical conflict that had characterized their first encounter. Admiral Thompson's willingness to learn and Sarah's ability to teach had created something valuable from what had initially appeared to be a career-threatening situation. As Sarah gathered her briefing materials, she reflected on how the confrontation had ultimately led to this opportunity to share her expertise with a senior officer who genuinely appreciated the complexity and importance of her specialty. The incident had tested her convictions, but ultimately validated her commitment to professional excellence and safety. Admiral Thompson's final comment before Sarah departed would establish the foundation for their future interactions and provide closure to the dramatic events that had brought them together. "Sergeant, I want you to know that your actions at the range, while unconventional, have taught me something important about the relationship between technical expertise and command authority. Thank you for the education." 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium in the main auditorium at Fort Benning, looking out at an audience of military personnel from across all branches of service. Her successful completion of the Advanced Marksmanship Instructor course had led to this moment, delivering the keynote address at the annual Military Training and Safety Conference. The transformation in Sarah's career and reputation had been remarkable. From a skilled but relatively unknown sergeant at a small training facility, she had become a recognized expert whose insights were sought by senior military leaders throughout the organization. Her story had become a case study in professional integrity and the importance of maintaining safety standards under pressure. Admiral Thompson sat in the front row of the auditorium, his presence serving as a powerful symbol of how their initial confrontation had evolved into a productive professional relationship. His recommendation had been instrumental in Sarah's selection for the instructor course, and he had become one of her strongest advocates for continued advancement. The audience included General Morrison, who had specifically requested that Sarah address the conference after reading Admiral Thompson's detailed reports about their encounters. The general's presence demonstrated the high-level attention that Sarah's story had attracted within military leadership circles. Sarah began her presentation by acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought her to this podium. Her willingness to discuss the confrontation openly, rather than avoiding the topic, demonstrated confidence in the principles that had guided her actions. 6 months ago, I found myself in a situation that tested everything I believed about military discipline, safety protocols, and professional integrity, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. Today, I want to share what I learned from that experience and how it has shaped my understanding of leadership and responsibility. The audience listened intently as Sarah recounted the events at the shooting range, providing context for the decisions she had made and the principles that had guided her actions. Her narrative was factual and objective, avoiding both self-glorification and unnecessary criticism of Admiral Thompson. The confrontation forced me to choose between following traditional hierarchical expectations and adhering to established safety protocols, Sarah explained. I chose safety, not because I wanted to challenge authority, but because I believed that protecting people was more important than protecting feelings. Admiral Thompson nodded approvingly at Sarah's characterization of her decision-making process. His public support for her position had been crucial in transforming the incident from a potential disciplinary matter into a teaching moment for the entire military organization. Sarah's presentation continued with an analysis of the broader principles that had been tested during her confrontation with Admiral Thompson. Her discussion addressed fundamental questions about the relationship between expertise, authority, and institutional responsibility. True military discipline requires more than simple obedience to orders, Sarah argued. It demands that we maintain our commitment to proper procedures and safety standards, even when those standards conflict with personal desires or hierarchical pressures. General Morrison leaned forward slightly, clearly engaged by Sarah's analysis. His interest in her perspective reflected the military's recognition that modern warfare required personnel who could think critically and make principled decisions under pressure. Sarah explained how her experience had led to changes in training protocols and safety procedures at multiple military installations. Her confrontation with Admiral Thompson had prompted a comprehensive review of how safety standards were communicated and enforced across different ranks and specialties. The incident taught us that safety protocols are only effective if they apply equally to everyone, Sarah noted. When we create exceptions based on rank or personal relationships, we undermine the very principles we're trying to protect. The audience included numerous senior officers who had been personally involved in implementing the procedural changes that resulted from Sarah's experience. Their presence demonstrated the widespread impact that her principled stand had achieved throughout the military organization. Admiral Thompson was invited to address the conference immediately following Sarah's presentation. His comments provided perspective on the incident from the viewpoint of senior leadership and demonstrated how the confrontation had influenced his own understanding of command responsibility. Sergeant Martinez taught me something important about the relationship between authority and expertise, Admiral Thompson began. True leadership requires recognizing when others have specialized knowledge that deserves respect, regardless of their position in the traditional hierarchy. Admiral Thompson's willingness to publicly acknowledge his initial mistakes and learning from the incident provided powerful validation for Sarah's actions. His support had been crucial in establishing the precedent that safety concerns could legitimately override hierarchical considerations. The sergeant's actions were not an attack on military discipline, Admiral Thompson continued. They were an expression of the highest form of military discipline, commitment to protecting personnel and maintaining standards under pressure. The Admiral's endorsement of Sarah's position carried particular weight because of his senior rank and his initial opposition to her actions. His public transformation from adversary to advocate demonstrated the potential for positive outcomes when individuals were willing to reconsider their positions based on new information. Sarah was then invited to participate in a panel discussion with other military personnel who had faced similar ethical dilemmas in their careers. The panel format allowed for a more detailed exploration of the principles and decision-making processes involved in challenging situations. Captain Williams, who had witnessed the original confrontation, served as the panel moderator. His presence provided continuity between the original incident and the current discussion of its broader implications for military training and leadership. Sergeant Martinez, how do you recommend that junior personnel prepare for situations where safety concerns conflict with hierarchical expectations? Captain Williams asked, opening the panel discussion. Sarah's response drew on her experiences as an instructor and